I never thought a regular walk by the river would lead me to one of the biggest regrets of my life. My name is Rick, and this is the story of how a small moment of curiosity threw me into a whirlwind I was never prepared for. The day was warm, the kind where the sun shines just enough to make you feel alive, and the gentle breeze carries the scent of flowers and grass. These walks were part of my routine, my way of clearing my head from the noise of daily life. I loved the peace they brought, but that day something caught my eye. Off in a nearby field, a chestnut horse stood grazing. Its coat shimmered under the sunlight, and for reasons I still cannot fully explain, I felt drawn to it. It was not like me to wander off like that, but something about the animal's calm presence called to me. I walked closer, my shoes sinking into the soft ground as I climbed over a fence, feeling the dirt cling to my soles. The horse lifted its head and looked at me with such gentle, almost human-like eyes. I stood there for a second, feeling a strange sense of connection, one I had never felt before. Without even thinking about it, I moved closer. The horse didn't back away, and that gave me a little confidence. I reached out to touch its side, and my hand brushed against its smooth, warm coat. I'd never touched a horse before, and its strength struck me. It was so powerful but calm at the same time. The more I touched the animal, the more relaxed it seemed. It snorted softly, its ears flicking back and forth, and for some reason, I thought it was a sign it was enjoying the attention. Emboldened by how calm the horse was, I let my hands wander a bit. I was fascinated by the way it moved, how its muscles twitched beneath my fingers. But then something unexpected happened. As my hand drifted lower, I realized I was touching something that was definitely not part of its back or side. I paused, staring down, and realizing that I was staring at the horse's genitals. At that moment, I knew I should have backed off, stepped away, but I didn't. Instead, curiosity got the better of me, and before I even realized it, I had reached out. The texture under my hand was not what I expected, soft on the outside, yet I could feel a firmness beneath it. I stood there, fascinated and confused, unable to tear myself away. I had no idea what I was doing, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. As I kept my hand there, I noticed the firmness growing, expanding. The horse shifted slightly, but didn't move away, and that only fueled my curiosity. I'd never seen anything like this before in my life. The thing kept growing, far beyond anything I imagined was possible. By the time it stopped, it must have been at least a foot long. The horse snorted again, tossing its head, and in my twisted state of mind, I thought it was reacting positively. I know now how absurd that sounds, how dangerous my assumptions were, but in that moment, I was too caught up in it. I squatted down to get a better look, drawn in by some strange impulse I still cannot explain. That was when I noticed its testicles, hanging low and heavy between its legs. They seemed larger than any animals I'd ever seen. Without even thinking, I reached out and touched them. They were warm, almost alive beneath my hands, and I felt a subtle shifting inside them. That should have been the moment I stopped. But instead, I did something that still haunts me to this day. A clear, thick fluid began to drip from the tip of the horse's penis, something I'd never seen before. My mind, clouded with confusion and an irrational sense of fascination, convinced me to touch it. And then, recklessly, I tasted it. It was sweet, like apples, but I wasn't thinking clearly enough to question why or how this was happening. My hands kept moving, and more of that strange fluid appeared. It spilled from my fingers and began to form small puddles on the ground. I could not handle it all. The horse's genitals had swollen even more, stretching far beyond anything normal. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in again, but this time something else happened. Without warning, the horse ejaculated. The force of it hit me like a wave. I was completely unprepared for what happened. It sprayed over me, my face, my hair, soaking me with the sticky fluid. For a moment, I was frozen in place, caught in this whirlwind of shock, confusion, and, to my shame, a twisted sense of excitement. The pleasure I felt in that instant, I am now deeply ashamed of. It all happened so fast that I did not even notice someone approaching until it was too late. I looked up, and to my absolute horror, there was Jake, my husband, standing by the fence. The look on his face was something I will never forget. His expression was a mix of shock, disgust, and disbelief. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" His voice was trembling with anger and confusion. Everything came crashing down on me in that instant. The reality of what I had just done. The absurdity, the shame. I scrambled to my feet, desperately wiping my face and trying to explain myself, but the words just came out jumbled. "Jake, I can explain," I stammered, knowing full well that there was no explanation that could ever make sense of this. "Explain?" He cut me off, his face twisted in fury. "Explain what? How the hell do you explain this?" His voice was rising, trembling with rage. "I cannot believe what I just saw. How could you? How could you do something like this?" I felt sick to my stomach. The full weight of what I had done hit me all at once, and I stood there, helpless, trying to find the words to make it right. But nothing I could say would ever erase the image he had just witnessed. "Please, Jake." "I am so sorry," I begged, choking on my words. "I do not know what I was thinking. It just happened, I swear. Jake could not even look at me. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. "I do not know who you are anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "This is disgusting. I need to get out of here. I cannot even be around you right now." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, broken and covered in shame. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. How could I have let this happen? How could I have betrayed Jake's trust in such a vile way? The horse stood nearby, completely oblivious to the storm of emotions raging inside me. I stayed there, crying until I had no tears left. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the pasture, I finally found the strength to get up. My face was streaked with tears, my body shaking from the aftermath of my actions. I walked home, every step heavy with dread for what would come next. The following days were a blur. Jake moved out, saying he needed time to process what had happened. Our house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. All I could do was replay that awful moment in my mind, over and over, wondering how I had let things get so out of control. I threw myself into therapy, desperate to make sense of what I had done. I needed to understand why I had acted so recklessly, why I had crossed such a terrible line. Each session was painful, like peeling back layers of shame and guilt. But I knew it was the only way forward, the only way to ensure something like this never happened again. Jake and I barely spoke during that time. When we did, it was tense, filled with hurt and anger. I could see the pain in his eyes, the way he struggled to even look at me. I knew I had shattered something deep between us, and I had no idea if it could ever be repaired. Weeks passed, and slowly, painfully, we began to have real conversations again. Jake agreed to couples therapy, though I could tell it wasn't easy for him. It wasn't easy for either of us. We talked about our marriage, about the things that had been broken long before that day by the creek. There were moments when it seemed like we wouldn't make it, that the hurt was just too deep. But then there were small signs of hope, glimmers that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. 6 months after the incident, Jake and I were sitting on the couch, the weight of everything we had been through still hanging in the air. He took my hand, his touch hesitant but real. "Sarah," he said softly, "I want you to know, I'm trying to forgive you. It's not easy, and I'm still hurt, but I see how hard you're working to change. I think we can get through this." Tears welled up in my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. "Thank you, Jake," I whispered. "I promise I'll never let you down again." It was a small step, but in that moment it felt monumental. We were not fixed, not by a long shot, but for the first time, I believed we might have a chance to heal. As we moved forward, things were not perfect, far from it. The road to rebuilding our relationship was filled with moments of doubt and tension. There were nights when Jake would sit in silence, lost in thought, the weight of what had happened still hanging between us. I knew it was hard for him to trust me again, and honestly, I did not blame him. Sometimes I even struggled to trust myself. But we kept trying. In therapy, I uncovered parts of myself I had not fully understood before. Feelings of emptiness, a need for excitement, and a deep sense of insecurity that I had buried for years. I had always thought of myself as stable, grounded, but now I saw how much I had been suppressing. Jake, too, had his own struggles. My actions had left him feeling inadequate, questioning his own worth in ways that hurt him deeply. He worked through these feelings in therapy, trying to reconcile his love for me with the pain of my betrayal. Slowly, things began to shift. The silences between us became less frequent, and we started talking more openly, sharing our fears and frustrations instead of letting them build up in the dark. It was not easy, but it felt like progress. For the first time in months, we started to laugh together again. Small moments that reminded me of the love we had before everything fell apart. One evening, as we were washing dishes together, a chore that had once felt so normal, but now felt like a return to something we had lost, Jake flicked some soap suds at me. It was such a small thing, playful and light, but I remember laughing and feeling like maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back to each other. But then, just as things seemed to be getting better, another challenge arose. Jake's brother was getting married, and the reception was to be held at a ranch, a place filled with horses. As soon as Jake told me, I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me. "I don't know if I can go," I stammered, my hands shaking as I set down my coffee cup. Jake's face fell. "Sarah, it's my brother's wedding. We have to go." "There might be horses there," I whispered, my cheeks burning with shame. Jake's expression was a mix of pain and frustration. "Do you really think you can't control yourself around horses now?" His words were sharp, cutting deep, but I knew I deserved them. "No, it's not that," I tried to explain. "I'm afraid of how you'll feel seeing me around them. I don't want to put you through that." Jake was quiet for a long moment, then he reached out and took my hand. "Sarah, we can't avoid horses for the rest of our lives. At some point, we have to face this. Maybe this is that point." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "You're right. I'll go. I promise, I won't let you down." The day of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves as we drove to the ranch. I could feel the tension radiating from Jake as well, though he tried to hide it. When we arrived, I saw the stables in the distance, and my stomach churned. But as the day went on, something unexpected happened. Being around the horses, seeing them from afar, hearing their soft neighs, did not fill me with temptation or shame. Instead, it reminded me of how close I had come to losing everything. Every glimpse of a horse made me more certain of my commitment to Jake and to our marriage. I realized that my moment of weakness had been just that, a terrible, isolated mistake. It was not who I was, and it did not define me. During the reception, I could see Jake watching me, his eyes darting between me and the stables. Finally, as the sun began to set, he took my hand. "Let's go for a walk," he said, his voice quiet but steady. My heart pounded as I followed him out to the pasture, where a beautiful bay horse grazed nearby. We stood by the fence, the air thick with unspoken emotions. "How do you feel right now?" Jake asked softly, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, thinking carefully about my answer. "Grateful," I said at last. "Grateful for you, for us, for this chance to make things right. That horse that's beautiful, but that's all it is. What happened that day was a terrible mistake, one I'll never repeat. Being here now, with you, this is all I want. All I'll ever want." Jake's eyes filled with tears, and he pulled me into a tight embrace. We stood there for a long time, holding each other as the last light of the day faded behind the hills. It was not a perfect moment, but it was real, and in that moment, I felt hope. That evening at the ranch marked a turning point for Jake and me. It was not some magical fix for everything that had gone wrong, but it was the first time in a long while that we faced something hard together. We still had work to do, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal, but it felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. In the months that followed, we continued to work on our relationship. We made it a point to be more open with each other, to share the things we were feeling instead of letting them fester. For the first time in years, we started making plans for the future again. It was something we had not done since before everything happened, and it felt like a sign that maybe we were healing. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking." I felt my heart skip a beat, unsure of what was coming next. "About what?" He took a deep breath. I think I am ready to start trying for a baby." The words took my breath away. We had talked about having children before everything fell apart, but after the incident, I had assumed that dream was lost, that Jake would never be able to trust me enough to take that step with me. "Are you sure?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Jake nodded, a small smile breaking through his otherwise serious expression. "I am sure. What happened, it was terrible, and it will always be a part of our story. But it is not our whole story. I love you, Sarah. I want to build a family with you." Tears of joy welled up in my eyes, and I threw my arms around him, holding him as tightly as I could. "I love you too, Jake. So much." In that moment, I realized how far we had come. The road to healing had been long and painful, and we still had challenges ahead of us, but we were not the same people we were on that day by the creek. We were stronger now, more aware of our own flaws, and more committed to each other than ever before. As I write this, I am 6 months pregnant with our first child. Every kick, every flutter inside me is a reminder of how close I came to losing everything, and how lucky I am to have another chance. Our journey has been anything but easy. There were moments when I thought Jake would never be able to forgive me, moments when I doubted myself, moments when it felt like the pain of what had happened would swallow us whole. But we kept going. We kept fighting for each other. And now, we are here, stronger, more united, and filled with hope for the future. To anyone who might be reading this, to anyone who might be tempted to give in to a moment of impulse or curiosity, I have one piece of advice. Stop and think. Think about the consequences. Think about the people you love, the ones you could hurt. No fleeting thrill is worth the pain and heartache that follows. It is never worth it. And to those who are struggling to forgive someone who has made a terrible mistake, I can only say this: forgiveness is not a destination. It is a journey. It takes time, patience, and a lot of work. But if both people are committed to healing and to growth, it is possible. It is possible to rebuild trust, to come back from the edge, and to create a relationship that is stronger than before. Every day, I wake up determined to be the wife Jake deserves. I choose to be faithful, to be honest, and to be loving. I choose our marriage, our family, and our future. The mistakes of our past do not define us. They can, if we let them, become the catalyst for something deeper, something more meaningful. My moment of weakness nearly cost me everything. But it also led me to become a better, stronger person. It taught me the true value of love, of trust, and of forgiveness. As I feel our baby move inside me, I am filled with hope for what lies ahead. Jake and I have weathered a storm that could have torn us apart, but instead, it brought us closer together. We are not perfect, and our relationship is not perfect, but it is real. It is honest. And it is built on a foundation of love and mutual respect that has been tested and proven strong. Our story is not over. In many ways, it feels like it is just beginning. And for that, for every moment we have been given to rebuild, I am deeply, deeply grateful.